The fountain was always the meeting point. Kids told their friends they would meet by the fountain, somewhere in the middle of the food court, between the Orange Julius and the stand that sold cookies the size of your hand. 2 stories of storefronts ran off in every direction under a long glass roof, and the air sat at the same flawless 72 degrees it held in every mall in the country, in July and in January alike. Bought it. A Spencer's in the dark corner that 13-year-olds dared each other to walk through, and a department store at each end so vast it had its own perfume cloud you could smell from the entrance. On a Saturday afternoon in the late 1980s, this was not really a place you went to buy something. This was simply where America went. It was the town square, the social club, the first date spot, and the air-conditioned babysitter, all under one roof. That place is dying now. All across the country, a great many of them are already dead, sitting dark behind chained doors with weeds pushing up through the parking lot. And the reason it happened is almost never the reason you have been told. There is a story everyone repeats about why the mall died, and it is short enough to fit on a bumper sticker. Amazon killed it. The internet showed up. Everybody started shopping in their pajamas, and the mall simply lost. It is a clean story. It is satisfying, and it is mostly wrong. The American mall was already bleeding out years before online shopping was anywhere near large enough to matter. What actually killed it had been sitting inside its own blueprint the entire time. The mall was built on 2 things that everybody treated as permanent, and neither one was: a bottomless supply of cheap borrowed money and the great American department store. Pull out either pillar and the whole structure sags. Both of them gave way at nearly the same time. Online shopping did not start this fire. It mostly just walked through afterward and made sure nothing crawled out alive. The whole idea came from a man who spent the end of his life apologizing for it. In 1956, an Austrian-born architect named Victor Gruen opened a building in Edina, Minnesota, a suburb of Minneapolis, and called it Southdale Center. It was the first fully enclosed, climate-controlled shopping mall in the world. Gruen was not trying to raise a temple to shopping. He was a European who missed the dense, walkable, old-world city centers he had grown up in, and when he looked at the cold, car-choked American suburb, he wanted to give it a heart. He imagined a covered public square where people would stroll past gardens, sit among sculptures, run into their neighbors, and happen to shop along the way. He anchored the place with a big Dayton's department store, lined the rest with smaller shops, and pictured the retail quietly paying for a slice of real public life. That is not what got built. The developers who copied his blueprint kept the part that printed money and quietly threw the rest away. The gardens shrank. The public square filled in with more storefronts. The civic dream got value engineered out, and what remained was a machine tuned for exactly one purpose, which was to keep you inside and spending. And that machine worked beyond anybody's wildest projections. All through the 1970s and 80s, the country threw up new malls at a staggering rate, hundreds of them a year at the height of the boom, each one anchored by department stores, each a near copy of the last. New retail space in America hit its all-time peak in the middle of the 1980s. By the time the building frenzy finally cooled, the United States had constructed so much store space that it carried something like 24 square feet of retail for every single person in the country, against maybe 2 or 3 square feet per person across much of Europe. America was not merely well supplied with stores, it was drowning in them. The peak of the entire era had a single address. In the summer of 1992, the Mall of America opened in Bloomington, Minnesota, 4.2 million square feet of stores wrapped around an indoor amusement park with a roller coaster running through the middle of it. It was the largest mall in the country, and it turned into a genuine tourist destination in its own right. By the mid-90s, it was pulling in something close to 43 million visitors a year, more people than visited Disney World, the Grand Canyon, and Graceland put together. The mall was no longer just where you shopped. For one strange moment, it was very nearly the most visited place in America. By then, the mall had quietly become the country's default social infrastructure, and that is the part the spreadsheets never captured. It was where teenagers got dropped off on a Friday night and learned how to be people in public. It was where retirees walked their morning laps before the gates even rolled up, where the multiplex and the arcade and the food court could turn an aimless afternoon into an actual event. A whole generation measured out its adolescence in those climate-controlled corridors. None of that showed up as revenue, which meant that to the people who owned the buildings, none of it really counted. The man who started it all wanted nothing to do with what it had become. Back in 1978, near the end of his life, Victor Gruen stood up at a meeting in London and publicly disowned the whole thing. "I refuse to pay alimony to those bastard developments," he told the room. "They destroyed our cities." The father of the shopping mall had disinherited his own child. He could already see what almost no one else could yet, that the machine had no heart left in it, and that a machine with no heart can only keep running for as long as the money keeps flowing. Because the fatal weakness was never the internet. It was welded into the blueprint from the start, in the shape of the anchor store. Here is how the machine actually worked. A mall was designed and financed around its anchors, the giant department stores planted at each end, Sears and JCPenney and Macy's and the rest of them. The anchors were the magnets. They hauled in the crowds, and they were very often handed their enormous spaces dirt cheap, sometimes for almost nothing at all, because their entire job was to generate the foot traffic. The actual profit came from the small inline tenants, the hundreds of little shops lining the corridors, who paid the steep rents. And those small shops signed their leases for one reason above every other: the promise that a big anchor would sit at the end of their hallway pumping out a river of customers. So the developers wrote that promise straight into the contracts, and it had a name: a co-tenancy clause. In plain language, it meant that if an anchor went dark, or if the mall's occupancy slipped below a certain line, the small tenants were legally entitled to slash their rent, stop paying altogether, or simply tear up the lease and walk away. While every store was healthy, this was an elegant machine. The moment the anchors got sick, it became a row of dominoes wired to topple together. One department store closing did not merely leave a hole at the end of the building. It legally entitled half the mall to leave right behind. For a long while, none of that mattered, because it looked eternal. Then the ground began to move under them. Big box stores like Walmart and Target learned to sell the same goods cheaper out on the highway. Suburban sprawl crept past the older malls toward shinier new ones. The novelty wore thin, and the country had flatly built too many. The whole overbuilt mass propped up on a mountain of cheap real estate debt that quietly assumed the crowds would never thin out. Malls had stopped being simple buildings somewhere along the way and turned into financial instruments, bought and sold and bundled against, their mortgages sliced into pieces and sold off to investors who were really betting on a single assumption that would not hold: that the anchors would stand forever and the customers would always come. By 2006, the warning was impossible to miss. That was the year the last major enclosed mall in America opened its doors, down in Jonesboro, Arkansas. The very next year, for the first time since the 1950s, not a single new enclosed mall went up anywhere in the States. The machine had stopped growing. From there, it had only one direction left to travel. Before we get to the part where the floor gives way, one quick aside. If you would rather have the structural story behind a collapse like this than the version that fits on a bumper sticker, that is exactly what we build here, one institution at a time. Subscribe, and the next one comes to you. The first hard shove came from the 2008 financial crisis. Credit froze, families slammed their wallets shut, and the weaker stores started going down in waves. But the truly fatal stretch came later, and it landed exactly where the blueprint was thinnest, at the anchors. One after another, the great department stores that held the malls upright began to die. The largest of them was Sears, and its fall is almost difficult to comprehend. Sears had once been the biggest retailer on the entire planet. For decades, you could order practically anything out of its catalog, and astonishingly, an entire house shipped to you in numbered pieces by railroad to be assembled on your own land. It was the Amazon of its century. Walmart had passed it back in 1989, and then Sears spent years being slowly starved of investment by its Wall Street ownership, the shelves thinning, the lights in the stores seeming to dim a little each season. At its height, the company had run more than 3,000 stores. In October of 2018, Sears filed for bankruptcy with barely 687 of them left, and it went right on closing more. Every single Sears that went dark was an anchor torn out of a mall, and every one of those triggered the co-tenancy clauses running down the corridor. Then JCPenney, the anchor to hundreds of malls all by itself, filed for bankruptcy in 2020. Macy's, frequently the last big anchor still standing in any given mall, kept announcing fresh rounds of store closures of its own. And every time one of these giants switched off its lights, the landlord was left holding a cavernous box built for a single purpose, nearly impossible and ruinously expensive to chop up and re-rent, while the small stores down the hall quietly exercised their legal right to run. A single anchor closing could hollow out an entire healthy-looking mall in just a year or two. The dominoes were never a metaphor. They were spelled out, in writing, in the leases, and you could watch it happen almost in real time. First, the anchor at one end goes dark, its name peeled off the brick and left as a paler rectangle where the letters used to be. Then the metal gates start staying down at midday on the smaller shops, one storefront papered over, then three, then a whole wing. The kiosks disappear from the center court. The stores, still hanging on, drift toward the one anchor left, breathing, and the far end of the building goes quiet and dim, a stretch people simply stop walking to. By the end, the loudest thing in the place is the echo. This is the stretch the headlines finally caught up to, and they handed it a name: the retail apocalypse. In 2017 alone, somewhere north of 12,000 stores shut their doors across the country. That same year, a widely cited report from the investment bank Credit Suisse predicted that a fifth to a quarter of all American malls would be gone within 5 years, by 2022. A while later, the real estate research firm Green Street went further still, forecasting that more than half of the department stores anchoring America's malls would close for good, and that somewhere between 30 and 35% of every mall in the country would eventually have to shut down entirely. And here is where the bumper sticker finally falls apart in your hands. If Amazon had genuinely killed them all, you would expect online shopping to be most of where Americans actually buy things. It is not, and it never has been, not even today. In recent years, online sales have grown to only about 16% of all retail in the United States, roughly $1 in every 6. The other 5 out of every $6 are still being spent in physical stores. The internet was real, and it quietly bled away just enough of the rich, high-margin sales the anchors depended on to push the weakest of them over the edge. But it was the final shove, not the first cause. The mall was already overbuilt, already drowning in debt, already chained to a dying breed of store. Online shopping simply took aim at the cracks that were sitting there all along. So what is actually left of it all today? A split screen. At the very top, a few hundred so-called Grade A malls, the ones planted in wealthy areas and stuffed with luxury brands and full parking lots, are not just surviving but thriving, busier now than they have ever been. They have quietly turned into something closer to an upscale day out than a place to go buy socks. Everything underneath them is somewhere along the death spiral. By one common estimate, only around 700 enclosed malls are still genuinely alive in America today, down from well over 1,000 at the peak. And some analysts believe the real survivors could one day be counted in the low hundreds. The husks left behind have grown into a strange new kind of American landscape. Some dead malls just sit abandoned, their fountains bone dry, their skylights gone green with algae, their long corridors silent except for the hum of the few lights nobody ever bothered to switch off. Others are being torn down and rebuilt into the things the suburbs genuinely need now: apartments and townhouses, medical offices, schools, churches, even warehouses and delivery hubs. There is a particular bitter irony in a dead department store being gutted and reborn as a fulfillment center, so that the very online orders blamed the mall now ship out of its hollowed-out corpse. What almost none of them are turning back into a laterally wanted, a true public square where people gather for with nothing they are required to buy. America built its town square out of private retail and cheap debt, leased the whole thing wall-to-wall to department stores, and when the leases came due and the stores died, the town square simply turned off the lights and locked the doors behind it. Gruen saw the ending coming a half-century early. He just was never able to stop it, which leaves only the question of your mall. Just about everyone who grew up in this country has one. The specific mall, the one with the particular fountain and the particular smell, the food court you sat in for hours doing nothing, the store your parents would not let you walk into alone. So tell me about it down in the comments. Is yours still standing? Is it thriving, half dead, or already a flat field of cracked asphalt with a seasonal Halloween shop blinking the last lit window? And then the harder question, the one the empty mall leaves sitting behind it. When you simply wanted a place to be somewhere, around other people, without paying a dime for the privilege, where did you go once the mall was gone? Because that, far more than the shopping, might be the real thing America lost when the lights finally went out.